Good morning. I'm going to call the meeting of the University of Minnesota's Board of Regents to order. And we are deeply grateful to our friends at Mayo for hosting us not only today, but in this wonderful facility, but since we arrived. So I'll make a general thank you right there at the outset, and we'll have an opportunity to say more as the meeting progresses. Of the 12 regents, we are missing Regents Powell and Simmons today. Both are unavailable and cannot participate. Regents Swigum and Cohen, I believe, are on the phone, and I'm going to take a moment to double check.
I am on the phone. This is Regent Cohen.
Very good.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Chairman McMillan, Steve Swigum here.
Very good. Thank you, both of you, for being here. And we're going to begin our meeting today by President Kaler and I introducing a key member of the university community here in Rochester. President Kaler will walk up to the podium.
Chair McMillan and members of the board, it is my pleasure, and especially here today in her own backyard, to introduce to you the new Chancellor for the University of Minnesota Rochester, Dr. Lori Carroll. Lori, would you please join us at the podium? The Chancellor of UMR is the Chief Executive Officer of the campus and reports directly to me, the President of the University of Minnesota. As the Chief Executive Officer of the Rochester campus, the Chancellor is responsible for academic, executive, and administrative leadership of the campus, including the procurement of adequate resources to support its mission. The Chancellor is also charged with facilitating, nurturing, coordinating, and supporting efforts of the administration, students, faculty, and staff on the Rochester campus, and with carrying out the campus and university's policies and procedures. The Chancellor represents UMR to the university, the community, the region, the Minnesota legislature, and the public and private sectors. Dr. Carroll, Dr. Carroll is a tireless advocate for UMR and who is known to the UMR community and, just as importantly, as we've seen during our time here, to the entire Rochester community. Besides recently serving so admirably as UMR's interim chancellor, Dr. Carroll, since 2014, was UMR's vice chancellor for academic affairs and student development. In that role, among other things, she was deeply involved in UMR's strategic, fiscal, facilities, and enrollment planning, its integrative planning in the downtown Rochester community. She was responsible for growing UMR's living learning communities, and she's been instrumental in developing the Higher Education Innovation Summit planned for this coming June. It's very clear to me that UMR is in great hands with Chancellor Carroll, and I look forward to working closely with her to advance the work of this campus and this community. Chancellor, congratulations. Please say a few words.
Thank you so much, President Kaler and Regents. I am honored to serve in this capacity and so grateful to work with extraordinary, innovative colleagues in this community and on the UMR campus and throughout the University of Minnesota system. Together, we have great expectations for the next season at UMR. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor Carroll, and I want to make one other recognition. We're always pleased when the members of the legislature and the government are here, and I see in the audience Senator Dave Senjum, Rochester's own, and thank you for spending time with us today. So, all right, I'd ask for approval of the minutes from our last meeting.
So moved. Second.
All right, the minutes from our February meeting have been moved and seconded. Any corrections, additions, edits to those minutes? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Very good. That takes us to your report, President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, and thank you to Chancellor Carroll, your team, and the entire Rochester community for your warm welcome and the informative day we spent together yesterday. UMR and this community are true partners. As you know, we are engaged in an extensive and rigorous system-wide strategic planning process, and we'll hear more about that later in the meeting. Our time here demonstrates how each distinctive campus in our system makes our system strong and the importance of each of the campuses in our strategic planning. I'm pleased to say that Governor Dayton has taken notice of the impact of our entire system statewide. I was fortunate to attend his State of the State address last week and heard him support us in keeping tuition down by pledging to support our $10 million supplemental legislative request and in fully supporting and actually adding to our capital request for renewing our facilities. The governor said, and I quote, "If we invest more in education, future generations of Minnesotans will be more successful. If we don't, they won't." I couldn't have said that better myself. As you know, I've testified 3 times already before legislative committees. I'm visiting legislators regularly, and I expect more committee appearances in the near future. With the help of our strong government relations team, we'll be working hard through May for our faculty, students, staff, and their families. Mr. Chair and members of the board, let me turn to one of the highlights of just about every one of my months on this job. Since I became president, I've been visiting a department on our Twin Cities campus pretty much monthly during the academic year. I'm up to 59 visits and counting. Recently, I visited our Speech, Language, Hearing Sciences department in our College of Liberal Arts. Besides preparing some needed members of the state's workforce, this department also produces some remarkable research and outreach. For instance, it houses the so-called voice bank, which allows people with debilitating and terminal diseases to store away, that is, bank, their voices before they lose their ability to speak. And later they can use their own words with a synthesizer to speak. I've visited departments and institutes in just about every college and school, from mechanical engineering to dance to pediatrics, and here's what I see and learn. It's not in the telling, but in the showing during these visits. Each department shows me the remarkable interdisciplinary research and teaching performed by faculty and staff who deliver every day on our mission. And I meet energetic and passionate students who are ready to make a difference, ready for the state's talent force. For example, 100% of our graduate students in speech, language, and hearing are employed after they complete their degrees, 100%. In touring labs and studios and hearing from our scholars, I also engage in a certain quality control check on these departments. And I do hear a few gripes, of course, but that's okay, because in the end, I see these visits as monthly, 1-hour-long sabbaticals, getting me out of the office and into the heart and soul of this university. They're inspiring, and they show me how great this university is. Others agree that we're strong and great, which is why progress continues in our Driven Philanthropic campaign. We had another regional launch earlier this month in Naples, Florida, with about 150 friends and supporters of the university. And thank you to members of this board who were with me last month at the Arizona launch, Regents Johnson, Sviggum, and Lucas. There's great energy for our priorities and for the direction in which we're headed, and the UMF and I will conduct another launch in New York City next month. We are at $2.7 billion raised towards our $4 billion goal. Listen to just what that 1 decimal point meant when we recently jumped from 2.6 to 2.7. That's one truly remarkable decimal point because it equals $100 million in gifts and pledges, and more importantly, the impact it represents. With each decimal point, we can provide 4,000 students with scholarships of $5,000 each, and endow 10 faculty or research positions to attract and retain the best leaders, and renovate a sorely needed teaching, research, or healthcare facility, and help get the most innovative new research off the ground to help find a cure or develop a process to keep our environment more sustainable. So just imagine for a minute all that we can do with our Driven campaign, and that's why we're working so hard towards this goal. On another matter, as you know, I'm the chair of the NCAA's Division I Board of Directors. even as we live through the popularity and the excitement of March Madness, Regent Anderson, and the men's and women's basketball tournaments. Big-time college sports, especially basketball, faces great ethical and financial challenges. And that's why the NCAA has established the Commission on College Basketball, which is being chaired by former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. Specifically, Secretary Rice and her colleagues are focusing on 3 areas. One is the relationship of the NCAA National Office, member institutions, student-athletes, and coaches with outside entities, such as apparel companies and agents. 2 is the NCAA's relationship with the NBA and the so-called one-and-done rule. And 3 is examining the right relationship between member institutions and the NCAA National Office to see if the current model provides the investigative tools, cultural incentives, and structures to ensure that exploitation or corruption cannot hide in college sports. Secretary Rice will deliver her report to the board on April 25th in Indianapolis, and of course, I will be there. And I will continue to keep you informed of this important work with the NCAA. As for us here at the university, we're proud of our Gopher women's basketball team, which made it to the final 32 teams in the nation. On the court, that is. In the classroom, our women's basketball team was actually among the Elite 8. The publication Inside Higher Ed annually conducts what it calls the Academic Performance Tournament for the men's and women's teams in the bracket. Takes into account the academic progress rate and graduation rates among teams. And our team was among the top 8 in the 64-team field. So we congratulate Coach Marlene Stallings and her team on a strong season on and off the court. Also, applause for Gophers indoor track athlete Caitlin Long, who won the NCAA national title in the weight throw, tossing the 200-pound weight more than 76 feet. Just think about that for a little minute. 76 feet, 20 pounds. She became only the second Gopher woman ever to win a national track championship. Congratulations, too, to diver Sarah Bacon, who last week won the NCAA 1-meter platform championship. And of course, and I think Chair McMillan may have something to say about this, our UMD Bulldogs men's hockey team will be playing tonight in the NCAA tournament. And with that, Mr. Chair, I conclude my report on a successful month, and if I may say, go Bulldogs. Thank you.
Thank you, President Kaler. A couple thoughts that I mentioned I'd come back to. We spent the day touring UMR and visiting with students, faculty, and staff. And I want to highlight a couple things we did yesterday. One of those was attending a poster session where students presented their research projects. And why is that remarkable? It's remarkable because a couple of those poster sessions and a couple of those projects were done by, here's the remarkable part, first-year students and many second-year students, undergraduate students, deeply engaged in research enterprise. And I find that extraordinary. I think most of my colleagues found that extraordinary. And on a equally extraordinary note, we had breakfast with 20 or 30 students yesterday, and one of them stands out in my mind, a first year, first few months student who finds as a stress reliever the ability to pull out his computer and work on organic chemistry problems. Now, that would not relieve stress for me, but it does relieve stress for that. What's my point? There are some very remarkable students, very remarkable talent here at UMR. Throughout the day, both a luncheon with the Destination Medical Center group and a dinner last night with Rochester community and area leaders, we saw evidence of the integration of this campus and how deeply integrated it is into the community here and across southeastern Minnesota. The campus is what it is, and this branch of the university is as important as it is because of partnerships with people like where we're hosted today, the Mayo organization. We're grateful, and we depend on those successful relationships going forward. Later in our meeting today, Chancellor Carroll will speak to the vision for UMR. We look forward to hearing about that. We look forward to the future. And none of us are anxious to leave Rochester, but we'll be back in Minneapolis for our next meeting. But we're very grateful to have had the time here today. And as most of you know, it's kind of my custom in my report to connect back to our priorities that we set at our July retreat last year, or following our July retreat, and just a couple I'd hold up for you for today. Watch for addressing our priority of achieving a vision for integrated academic medical enterprise. We'll have an update from President Kaler and his leadership team on that matter, and importantly, we also have Vice President Levine here to tackle and discuss with us a very important part of our priority to complete a system-wide strategic plan with the research and discovery focus. So I look forward to those, and thank you, President Kaler, for recognizing the Bulldogs as they work to replicate last year's advancing all the way to the Frozen Four in the final game. Who knows what will happen, but we wish them good luck against Minnesota State Mankato. And I also want to note that the Gopher women's basketball outcome, getting to the second round of that tournament, was against before falling to Oregon, was something we are all proud of. So with that, I'll conclude my report and move on to the next item on our agenda, which is receiving and filing reports, the quarterly report of grant and contract activity, the East Cliff annual report, and the Finance and Operations Committee items, or committee information items. There's a couple real estate transactions in there. I also would note that 2 employment contracts are not in that report today. We'll deal with those later, but there are some items that have been added, and I'm going to turn to President Kaler to address one of those.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As has been well reported, and you know, the Director of Athletics, Mark Coyle, and the headsman's hockey coach, Don Lucia, have agreed that Coach Lucia will step down as head coach from a position that he's held for 19 years. Their agreement calls for Coach Lucia to work as a special assistant to the athletics director through the end of the 2018-19 academic year. And that change in position will require amending Coach Lucia's existing contract with the university. We recognize this is an item of high public interest. We recommend it to you, and I encourage this amendment.
And thank you, President Kaler. And I'd call on, is Provost Hanson or someone want to address the dental school appointment?
Very good, Chair McMillan. Provost Hanson, thank you.
Chair McMillan and members of the board, I'm pleased to introduce to the consent report today an item for Gary Anderson to serve as the Dean of the School of Dentistry. This is a fixed term appointment for which would run until December 31st, 2019. Gary would assume the Dean role, assuming your approval, effective March 26th after having served as the school's interim Dean since November 2016. He'll continue to provide leadership, clarity, and continuity for academic, clinical, and budgetary and strategic oversight of the school. Prior to becoming interim dean, Gary was senior associate dean and chair of the Department of Diagnostic and Surgical Services. He's been a member of the faculty since 1984.
Thank you, Provost Hanson, and for the members of the board, the Anderson contract was in your materials in the docket, the original docket, and the Lucia contract is in the supplemental written materials that you have before you. So if there's discussion on the consent items, I'm open to that. Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, on the Gary Anderson appointment, which I fully support, not often do you hear from like colleagues, in his case, dentists. And 4 different dentists weighed in on this appointment, people I know and are deeply supportive of Gary Anderson being the Dean of the School of Dentistry. And I think that speaks volumes about Mr. Anderson and his capabilities. Second of all, Mr. Chair, and a question of the President in regard to the Lucia contract extension or revision, if I may. He will be a fundraiser, as I understand it, in the Department of Athletics in the hockey arena. Is there a goal of fundraising that Mr. Lucia is expected to achieve during this time? What are the parameters of that?
President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, Regent Johnson. The goal for the Mariucci renovation, if I remember correctly, is $1.5 million. It's very difficult in a fixed period of time of a year to judge yes or no, because the timing of gifts and the delivery of the funds is something that isn't in the fundraiser's control. But we do believe that Mr. Lucia has an effective network, obviously built by 19 years of coaching, and will advance these conversations. So we're comfortable in his role.
Very good. With that, Mr. Chair, I do support the Lucia contract.
Would you translate that support into a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I move the approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Very good. It's been moved and seconded. Discussion on any items in the consent agenda. Very good. I'll call for a vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, Regent Cohen and Regent Swigum. I think we heard ayes on the phone as well. So, and with that, I'd now invite our student representatives to come on up, and Representatives Joshua Peterson and Alexander Euland. I'm sorry. I don't know what I just called you, but I'm sorry, Josh Preston. I came up with something else there. So they're here to present to us the report of the student representatives. The report I can't ever have our student representatives before us without acknowledging the extraordinary debt we owe them for the time they spend not only being students, many of them are deeply engaged in student government work, yet they find time to study, to participate, to do outreach, and to inform the governance process, which is what they're here for today. So you two have the floor.
Chair McMillan, members of the board, my name is Joshua Preston. I'm a graduate of the U of M Morris, class 2013, and currently a law student at the U of M Law School.
And I'm Allie Euland. I'm a junior at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and I'm a marketing major with a communication minor.
And I'll begin by saying that it's very different from attending the standing committee meetings where we have the little pull-up desk on the side, and then now to be pivoted where addressing all of you directly. As the student representatives of the Board of Regents, our responsibilities, of course, include voicing the concerns of students within the standing committee meetings of this board. But in addition to that, I think one of the major products that we're responsible for is actually producing the annual report. And there are many values for this report. I think that on the one hand, it signals concerns of the student body, but it also enters into the public record and an aspiration of what the university can be. Historically, both the board and the administration have been very receptive to these past reports, and we certainly applaud the fact that this board has taken the initiative to strengthen its policies regarding sexual assault, changing admissions data practices, and supporting mental health services. And so it's for this reason that we are optimistic that consideration will be given to this year's topics. And as you have the report in front of you, those topics include improving diversity inclusion facilities, efforts, and disability services, reevaluating student information privacy, consistency and credit transfer between campuses, and encouraging corporate social responsibility of university suppliers. One of the unique approaches we've made to this report is that we did not think it was sufficient just to identify a few topics that we think students stand behind, but to kind of offer what we think is a broader umbrella of which all of these are a part. And the title we gave to that was this idea of new expectations. And perhaps as a, such an umbrella was necessary, I think as a testament to the times we live in and the civic mindedness amongst the student body, is that we have to recognize that the expectations of students nowadays are not the expectations of a generation ago. When students come to the University of Minnesota now, they do so with an expectation that the campus community they are a part of is a reflection of society at large. And I think that's a reasonable expectation given the fact that we know being part of a diverse community is going to prepare these people for the broader global community as well. Additionally, I think a lot of students expect there to be certain safeguards when it comes to certain information that's shared with the public. I think that a lot of students also expect that an education on one campus in one part of the state is going to be recognized as just as valuable and just as important as an education in a different part of the state. Finally, I think a lot of students expect that when money is spent in our name, for our interest and for our benefit, that money is spent in a way that accurately reflects our values. So I think it's kind of like the broad vision under which these topics fall. But for the interest of time, we will, of course, discuss each of them, but we're going to give a special priority to diversity and inclusion and also encouraging corporate social responsibility of university suppliers. This is not meant to suggest that these other topics are in any way less of a priority, but rather just to acknowledge that time is short. So with that said, we'll go ahead and start with the first topic, and Allie?
Yeah, absolutely. The topic of diversity and inclusion has always remained at the forefront of discussions regarding student life and campus climate. It is circled back to during talks of admissions and always considered to be a vital component of the values of the university. Explicitly mentioning diversity and inclusion in the teaching and learning portion of the university's mission statement in itself sets a high expectation of commitment to the issue. However, as students, we ask that closer attention and more dedication be paid to the matter. At the Twin Cities campus, diversity and inclusion efforts have been recognized by both Insight into Diversity's Higher Education Excellence in Diversity Award and also Campus Pride's 2016 Best Top 20 list of LGBTQ-friendly universities. To continue striving for excellence, however, attention is needed to support campus climate initiatives in the Office of Equity and Diversity. While hiring a director of campus climate initiatives was a step in the right direction, adequate funding to support these initiatives is imperative. Separate from the Office of Equity and Diversity, attention is needed in the Race, Indigeneity, and Gender Studies departments as well. Within the American Indian Studies Department, this translates to additional funding for programming. Within the African American Studies Department, this means filling the eventual vacancies of 3 faculty members who will soon be retiring. In the Asian American Studies Department, this means planning for future funding after the end of a 5-year grant that is currently funding the department. For the Chicano Latino Studies Department, this means an additional faculty member to meet the demands of Latino Studies classes. And finally, for the American Studies Department graduate program, this means funding for additional graduate students in order to maintain or improve the program's current number 2 ranking among public institutions and 5th ranking overall. At the Crookston campus, the Office of Diversity and Multicultural Programs has been in existence since the fall of 2001. The office is able to serve the students of Crookston in a variety of different ways, including offering academic advising services to students of color and also promoting cultural programs both on and off campus. This office could use additional support, however, and resources behind its current working initiative with the admissions office to grow and sustain diversity on campus by recruiting students of color. Up in Duluth, the Multicultural Center, or MC for short, on campus opened its doors in 2004. Today, the MC houses the offices of 14 student groups and organizations and acts as a welcoming and inclusive environment to all. Being so inclusive, however, the MC has virtually reached capacity. To address this, the office requested funding to remodel the existing space in a way to reconfigure it and optimize that space in a way that better meets the needs of students. They requested this from the Student Service Fees Committee at Duluth just about a month back. On the other hand, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at UMD has shown exceptional fiscal responsibility while operating with limited staff. For instance, the Women's Resource and Action Center, or RAC for short, has been operating without a coordinator since 1991. Now, to put that in perspective, that's about 5 years before I was born. Additionally, the creation of 2 positions, one being an admissions staff member with a focus on the recruitment and retention of marginalized and underrepresented students, and the other being a staff member who specializes in immigration matters, would greatly improve and advance diversity and inclusion efforts at UMD. The diverse population of the Morris campus is thriving. About 31% of students are American Indian and students of color, with an additional 10% of the student population being comprised of international students. To accommodate these students, Morris has the Multi-Ethnic Resource Center, which is housed in the oldest building on campus. One notable gap at Morris, however, is the lack of an American Indian Cultural Center, the addition of which would positively impact both recruitment and retention of American Indian students at this campus. The diverse student population here at Rochester is one that continues to grow. UMR would like to acknowledge and thank the Twin Cities for funding some of the campus's efforts, namely the summer and winter bridge programs. The current efforts in place supporting diverse students here at UMR are rather satisfactory, as I'm sure you've seen, but one area needing support is the recruitment and retention of faculty and staff of color. At UMR, students from diverse backgrounds seek faculty who demonstrate that educational success is valued, achievable, and lucrative. For the current students missing these role models, it can be difficult to navigate a system without the visual reminders and examples of the institution's commitment to diversity that faculty and staff of color can provide. I would like to briefly touch on disability services as well. Now, there are a variety of different topics that are mentioned in the report. However, what might not be explicitly shown is just how these services support students. For example, students at the highest level of campus governance are currently receiving these services. We would like to make it a point that disability services is about not only making a degree present, but making it obtainable to all students. What this translates to is investing in adequate testing spaces, staff who understand what these students are going through, and finally, adequate training for professors to respond to these students with disabilities. Next, we'd like to briefly touch on information privacy.
So this is the part of the report where you might recognize that maybe the law student had a hand. Anytime you see the section symbol, that's someone justifying their JD. One thing to emphasize is that students have very little understanding of their data privacy rights when it comes to directory information. Allie is an orientation leader in Duluth, and she could probably speak to, from her experience, that not a lot of students come to the university with an understanding of necessarily what directory information is, if they're even informed of it. And of course, the ways in which students are exposed to this is going to vary between campus, but also even college. So there are, of course, many reasons why students may not understand what their relationship is to public directory information. What we end up proposing in this report is actually a Regents policy change to the student education records policy that will just simply take advantage of the flexibility Congress has allowed higher education institutions. It's a relatively minor fix. We think there is a value of having public directory information. It need not be all or nothing. It shouldn't be everything from email addresses, home addresses, phone numbers, degree pursued, all that being public, but it also need not be hidden behind an X500 sign-in. There is a middle ground, and we discussed that in the report, and we hope the Regents give special attention to it. The second topic that we'll just briefly move on to is credit transfer and there being consistency between the campuses. So my undergraduate diploma from the U of M Morris that hangs on my mother's little mantelpiece, and which we're all very proud of, it looks no different than the diploma that Allie's going to get a year from now. It says
Hopefully.
More than we believe in you. We support you. It's going to look no different. Mine does not say Morris on it. Yours will not say Duluth on it. From the other R2Rs, it won't say Rochester or the Twin Cities. It's going to say the University of Minnesota. And the fact that we all are at the same institution, ostensibly getting the same quality of education, that should be recognized. There should not be some campuses who are going to make distinctions that a credit from one poli-sci class here is less than the credit of a poli-sci class over here. It simply does not make sense. And I know that from my experience and the experience of some other people who've attended coordinate campuses, is that we're often promised that one of the values of being at a coordinate campus is the ease of transfer of credits. That becomes a selling point. That becomes something that tilts the scale in favor of going to some of these coordinate campuses. And the fact that that is not recognized, I think is an immense disservice. I think that when it comes to students taking advantage of their own educational trajectory, people go to campuses and transfer for a myriad of reasons. We should not have barriers in that process, and we should try to remove those barriers as much as we are able. That's all we'll say about credit transfer for now. We discuss this more in the report, and we hope this is something that the Regents give attention to. Finally, our last topic is in regards to corporate social responsibility. Some of the policies the Regents have addressed over the last several months have focused on the code of conduct of students, which we applaud and we celebrate. It's also focused on the conduct of student groups, which we understand that there are a lot of conflicting visions of, but in any case, we are trying to work to raise the standards of students, groups, and other key players. Some of the key players we can't forget in this conversation are also university suppliers. As an institution, we should not shy away from trying to raise the conduct of those businesses we contract with. Currently, the university contracts with approximately 38,000 suppliers, and save for a stipulation that for state-appropriated funds, 20% of purchasing contracts should be awarded to local small businesses, the remainder are evaluated on a case-by-case basis by the unit or the department who will eventually receive the goods or services. While there are, of course, many benefits to this, the lack of a standardized criteria has led to the university partnering with companies that may not, through their practices, may not align with the mission of our university. So as a public land-grant institution and as a steward of the public, we must be conscious of both the relationships we cultivate and the practices we encourage. We are a major economic driving force in this state, and that's a message we put on our literature. It's a message we carry with us to the Capitol. And so because of that, we should not shy away from guiding the business landscape toward a greater understanding of corporate social responsibility. In consultation with scholars from both the Carlson School of Business and the Law School, the student representatives developed a proposed supplier code of conduct. This is not new territory. We would not be the first higher ed institution to adopt such a policy. And in fact, an institution like the University of Michigan already has such a code. What we've offered in our proposed supplier code of conduct, which is in the appendix of our report, is basically a baseline of standards that we should expect the people we work with to uphold. This includes non-discrimination, equal opportunity in employment, basic labor standards, harassment-free workplaces, health and safety, and environmental sustainability. In addition to this proposed supplier code of conduct, we've also proposed a series of other recommendations that might help with such a rollout if a code were adopted. So, for example, screening the university's pre-established preferred suppliers to ensure they align with this code, having a conversation with not only amongst the board, but also with other stakeholders like department heads and students regarding what weight to give something like this code of conduct and evaluations of different bids. Perhaps having an evaluation committee for proposals of over $1 million. Maybe that's too high, maybe that's too low. That's a conversation we can have in the coming months, years. Training for end users to familiarize themselves with the code of conduct. I hope this isn't a shock to the board, but I think that one could imagine that some of the policies that we have at the higher levels, by the time they trickle down to the lowest level, sometimes application might vary or people may not necessarily understand. So having this coupled with some kind of training would be very valuable. And then, additionally, an annual review of this code of conduct. What we propose forward is merely a draft. And we understand that as this conversation continues, some things might find their way into it, some things might find their way out. In any case, this is a conversation that we should have. We are under no illusion that not only with our report topics generally, but especially with this in particular, that we're being very ambitious. But ambitious is exactly what we should be. As I've already mentioned, this idea of new expectations, I think for a lot of students, when they come to a university and they know money is being spent in their name, in their interest, and for their benefit, they want those purchases to reflect their values. Now, even though we are only one cohort of student representatives, sometimes good ideas have lives of their own. Much in the same way past recommendations from the student reps have informed our approach and our advocacy on the standing committees, so too are we hopeful that the ideas we've outlined in this year's report will be carried on by the next cohort of student representatives. With that said, we also have a laundry list of thank yous to make, and so we'd like to make those acknowledgments quickly.
Absolutely. We would like to first thank the other student representatives for their tireless work these past months, both representing the students of the University of Minnesota system and on this report. So thank you to Lauren Anderson, Sean Chen, Marta Dean.
Many of them are here, so we just have them stand up as well. So why don't you rise and...
Marta Dean, Mina Kian, Aporva Mullervanen, and Parker Smith. We would also like to thank all of you, the Board of Regents, for your tireless commitment to both students and this institution. It is greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Representatives Preston and Euland that nothing warms my heart more than seeing someone from the law school and from UMD presenting. So wish I could claim to have had engineered that. I didn't. But and you are free anytime, Mr. Preston, to remind at least two of the members of the board about where your degree is going to come from in law and to tout that and the skills that come with it. But I'm going to turn to President Kaler because I know he's got a couple thoughts. I have a couple as well, and then open up the board to feedback.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this very, very good report. I really appreciate the research and advocacy that you brought forward on these issues. We had the luxury of previewing your report, and so I can talk to some of the points that you bring forward and inform the board about next steps. In terms of diversity and inclusion, I think you all know that I am completely committed to growing our efforts towards diversity and inclusion system-wide. The number of reports to the EOAA is growing, and that will likely continue to increase as we pay more attention to sexual misconduct resulting from my initiative to prevent it. And we know that EOAA has added 2 positions since it began responding to the reports in 2014. There were 22 investigations in fiscal 15 and 48 in fiscal 17. So we need to be mindful to the need to increase staffing there. As for disability inclusion and access, as you noted, there are an increasing number of students receiving services, and they are of increasing complexity. And those occur on all of our campuses. And we're responding to the changing needs in a number of ways, and I won't enumerate all of them. But for example, in the Twin Cities, the Disability Research Center is adding an additional full-time testing coordinator, which I believe you called for explicitly, to address the needs of students who require those accommodations. We're adding additional student access manager, et cetera. On the system campuses, we have biweekly phone conferences between all of the disability service providers to share information and resources. So we are completely committed to reducing those barriers for students with disability. In the College of Liberal Arts on the Twin Cities campus, Dean John Coleman and his team is working hard. Most of the departments that you highlighted were involved in a 3-year planning process that the dean has instituted, and I believe that will address many of the concerns that you raised. In addition, he's hired a new director of diversity, equity, and access for undergraduate education, enhanced the diversity of the advising staff, and expanded MLK Junior and President's Emerging Scholars Advising Communities and Programming, among other things. In terms of student data privacy, on the directory of information, the university currently has a group exploring the feasibility of creating what we're calling limited directory information, which I believe, Mr. Preston, is more or less exactly what you'd like to see. It will adjust some of what is designated as directory information in, believe it or not, a Board of Regents policy pursuant to FERPA, and so we'll begin to see how we can adjust that. And again, that goes through faculty governance and ultimately will come to the Board of Regents for consideration and potential adoption. And again, we're looking at updating the functionality of the search or the umn.edu/lookup feature so that it will display less student information and particularly eliminate what's called scraping. That's a technical term of the art where trolls, another term of the art, are able to scavenge student data from that database, and we really want to find a way to stop that. We also need to educate students on their data privacy rights. There are several ways that students learn about data, but the Board of Regents policy on student education records and the related managing student records policy are published online. I don't think that does you a bit of good at all because you don't know to go look to find these things online. So we're looking to streamline our communication and make clearly available to students what's available publicly and how they can go onto MyU and actually eliminate or change what information is available. So we should have that in place by the beginning of the summer. System transfer credits, a very real concern. It is true that all the University of Minnesota courses are listed on one university-wide transcript, regardless, as you know, from the campus or campuses. So there's not really a transfer credit issue. What there is in some cases issues around the equivalency of credits and how that's done. And Mr. Preston again mentioned that. I talked in February about what we're calling the Transfer Evaluation System, or TES, and that's technology that helps us determine equivalencies between courses across the campus and from outside, and we'll make that information available to prospective and current students. So we will have a very efficient and transparent way to guide people as they choose those courses. And finally, I completely agree around the supplier code of conduct. We don't have a formal code because actually the majority of the items in the primary standards section are covered in our terms and conditions, your proposed code of conduct, and they're part of every purchase order and contract. And I know that our director of purchasing, Tim Bray, has had discussions with the Office of General Counsel on, in fact, creating a more formal and enumerated code of conduct, so we can work with you to do that. But I am assured that we do factor in supplier ethics and conduct during our overall reviews of RFPs, and we have in the past chosen not to add a supplier because of a long pattern of employee discrimination cases in that particular situation. So that's a snapshot response to the important points that you've raised, and we'll continue to be eager to work with you and your colleagues going forward to make this a better place for everybody. So again, I thank you personally for your engagement and your work on this. Sure.
Thank you, President Kaler. A nice, comprehensive and yet concise response. Representatives Preston or Euland, any response from you on anything that the President had to say before I open it up to the board?
Yeah, well, I think firstly it's great to see such an eager response initially. It's fantastic. Overall, thank you for looking into this report and taking it as seriously as it has been in the past and continuing that forward.
And I can only echo that. So thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome.
Well, I'll add my own thanks to both of you. I said a broad thanks at the beginning, but the report is thoughtful, comprehensive, and aspirational and challenging in a couple ways, and I think that is a great role for you to play. And you and your colleagues in the back, I'll take this opportunity as well to thank the rest of the student representatives that are here, and a wonderful year of service reflected in this excellent report. So, members of the board, Regent Omari.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you to all of the student reps. As a former student rep, I wish I could take credit for this report instead of the ones I helped write. I want to quickly just make note of what came across in the document that shows that y'all are being so thoughtful and even in some cases disagreeing with what y'all are talking about. And I think that shows a level of research, a level of respect, a level of debate around tough and challenging conversations. So I appreciate that. I'll make two other comments. One, the data privacy conversation was happening when I was in college, and so it's interesting to see it continue and happen today. As I was reading this, I went and checked what's on One Stop under my name. And then the second thing, and I think this will probably be directed towards the president, Aramark as a company that you all pointed out as a case study is no surprise that they have ethical issues. I mean, it's been documented for many, many years. And so the first thing that I'll note is since their contract is up in 2020, that probably means that an RFP is going to go out soon, if it hasn't already. I recognize that it'll cost a lot of upfront money if we were to switch companies. But my question to the president is, if we have a process that does look at ethical standards, it leads me to ask or come to two conclusions. One is all the other companies that have capacity to do this have worse ethical standards, or we just chose to overlook that. And maybe you're not the person to answer that. Maybe Mr. Bertelsen might be the person that has more knowledge about that. But I'm curious to know. So if it's well documented and we know it, does no one else have better ethical standards?
President Kaler.
Mr. Chair, Regent Omari, that's an excellent question, and I don't know the details of the Aramark decision, and I don't know that we could unpack that for you here today. But unfortunately, in the world sometimes, as we all know, you're in a position where you need to make a decision, and you may find an overall balance of the scope of delivery, the quality of the product, and the cost may, in a balance, say, okay, yeah, we understand in this space there are ethical issues in all providers, and this is the choice that we will make. But as you say, that contract is up, and we intend to look in a very bright way at what that calls for. But I do see that Vice President Spolna and Bertelsen are in the audience, and they perhaps can give you a more fulsome answer.
Thank you, President Kaler. Vice President Volna.
Chairman McMillan, Regent Amari, thanks. We've already begun conversations with the students around this. To just refresh your memory, we actually have a very robust process right now when we conduct an RFP for evaluating, which does include a requirement for evaluating supplier diversity. What I would envision is that we would probably want to incorporate something like this into that process. The reality, as the President said, is that sometimes there isn't a black and white sort of go, no-go standard. And so depending on how we would craft that, it might be that we take it into consideration, but it is not the sole deciding factor in a decision such as, let's say, an Aramark or what have you. So that's the way we've typically done it. That's the way I would envision we would move forward with this. And I think that provides balance to all the factors and all the considerations you would want to look at in your supplier diversity and your supplier selection process.
Regional Omari, follow-up?
Yeah, just very quickly. I'm excited to see the document that says we had a competitive process and there's more than one bidder. That's what I'm excited to see. That's it.
Very good. Thank you. We'll let you go this time, Vice President Bertelsen. But don't go far. All right, let's see, Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do want to thank all the student representatives for this work. Over the last number of years, this has been the recommendations have been items that we adopt in our own work plan, and thinking one among many that you've had impact on that is student mental health resources. Both the idea and then also the detail and analysis that you do helps our staff really begin our work in the following years. I do want to comment about the corporate social responsibility. I had an opportunity to attend a briefing with the on behalf of the Office of Investment and Banking, Stuart Mason, and he invited me to a meeting with the CEO of BlackRock Investment, which is the world's largest asset management company, who we do business, Larry Fink, and Mr. Fink has publicly stated, this is again the world's largest investment house, and I'm shifting from suppliers to investment for a minute, but that he intends to hold the underlying companies with whom he invests to a higher standard of corporate social responsibility. So this is really a dynamic and quick moving, and so work like this does have an impact. It's cumulative, and I'm glad to see you've got specific recommendations, so keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. I think Regent Rocha as well, and I just note that we have the Vice Chair and Chair of the Policy and Governance Committee here, coupled with Director Steves. I think we've got a robust process and approach in place, and this is a great example of how your ideas can feed into not only the administration's perspectives here, but also our own board governance approach on this. So, Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would ask our colleagues on the other wing to step in at any point in time as we dominate from this side of the table, apparently. This is one of my favorite parts of the Regents calendar, joining my colleague, Regent Omari, and President Kaler as former student representatives, and I also continue to reflect on the breadth and the sophistication of the reports that you bring forward. It's impressive, and I appreciate the work that you do. Just going through a couple of different items. I know one of the challenges when you're putting your report together is fighting the kind of human perception that silence means consent, that anything you didn't bring up is going swimmingly well, and that there aren't other considerations to bring up. And so that's, of course, what we look to you for through the rest of the calendar year to bring things forward and continue to refine. I was struck when you talked about the directory information that over the last couple of years we've had conversations about access to that information, and I think we were remiss, at least the conversations I was a part of, in not actually talking to those of you who were most directly affected by what is being provided. And so I'm very happy to see that you are engaging this conversation and trying to find that balance between opportunity, because to some extent you become aware of things that may not otherwise come to your attention because people have access to contact you through your information, but also then finding the protection, much as the President very aptly stated in his comments earlier. When I read the report, I was really surprised to see the credit transfer issue there. Not so much that it isn't important, but we spent the better part of the 90s, working on this issue, and so I'm very interested in maybe getting a little more in the specifics of what you're describing, because that was a time where we as a state were trying to deal with very limited resources, and how do we best serve students, and this is now 2 generations prior to you, their ability to, how do we serve them and provide an ability to start at one campus in one system, possibly even the privates, and be able to coordinate. And so the state really made a lot of investment to make that work. And so we literally had within our system, Econ 101 at Morris being a 4-credit class, but it would be a 5-credit class on the Minneapolis campus, and you'd have to take it over again because it wouldn't meet that. And so I'm hoping that isn't the nature necessarily of the challenges, but the things that were described by the President. But I know for me, I hold that near and dear to my heart. So any more specifics you can provide in helping us find a way of addressing those concerns, I think is time well spent, certainly on behalf of students, whether by you or and by the board and administration. And then finally, I'm looking forward to upcoming conversations about the code of conduct issues with respect to student groups. Having been a part of that conversation early, the intent was very much, I think, and again, this came out from the President's recent statement on this, the intent was to move in the same direction as the concerns, but there was just maybe not the communication necessary, and I certainly will take my share of responsibility for not having been a part of that conversation. But with the limited bandwidth that I think we all have as members of the board and so on, we're sort of dealing with the issue in front of us, and so I'm very, very happy that the students are now engaged in that conversation, and I believe we as a board are committed to coming to a well-accepted and sensible response to that, and that holds folks accountable. I do want to point out that, and this is my first opportunity to speak to that issue publicly, but the concept of accountability for groups when there is knowledge or reasonably should have been knowledge by the group went to a very important issue, and that is dealing with issues of sexual assault, ensuring that if student organizations are having events that there is at least a reasonable understanding that there is liability if you're putting people at risk, that the student group needs to be mindful of that. So that will be part of the conversation going forward, but I appreciate that you've brought it up, and it was just an excellent report. Thank you.
Representatives Preston or Euland, any response? You don't need to, just want to give you the opportunity.
Well, I mean, first to your discussion of credit transfer. Thank you for your input. At law school, you get very good at saying the following is, we don't have an answer yet, but we will brief that and get it to you.
You have 30 days.
All right, okay. So, yeah, the signed and stamped court order. I think that brings up a very good point. And I can say it's just interesting to hear about both of y'all's experiences. Having gone to Morris, and of course I was actually a student representative when you were chair, Regent Omari. Is that just interesting how, because of maybe turnover and a diminishing institutional memory on the part of students, that sometimes these issues rise and fall. And so it's just very interesting that there's some stuff we're discussing now that was discussed back in the 1990s, whereas even some of the issues that we confront today are some of the same issues that we were discussing, just 10 years ago, right? So it's just very interesting, and so I'm hoping that at least some of the ideas here take a life of their own, and that it's not something we continue discussing 10, 20 years from now. So thank you for your comments, and thank you for the insightful response regarding credit transfer, and we'll brief it and get it back to you within 30 days, Regent Rocha.
Thank you.
All right. Regent Lucas, did you have? I saw an earlier hand, but maybe you...
No, I thought it was a great report. Thank you.
All right. Regent Anderson, and then Regent Hsu, and then we're going to move on.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I'll just be very brief. Chairperson, Vice Chair Ulan, really appreciate the report. My first meeting 3 years ago was the meeting of the student reps, and I can still remember it was on financial literacy and asking for help in the mental health issues. And we struggled through that with the help of Provost Hanson. I know we've been able to eliminate wait lines at mental health. We're still serving the symptoms and not finding the root causes, but we're working that way too. But I find this a very valuable report. I've got college-age children myself. Regent Beeson touched on a subject on the, if you want to call it the social responsibility of, you people talked about our suppliers, and Regent Beeson touched on the investment where a university puts its endowment money. And we did have that discussion in, where are we, February? We're in March now. We had that discussion last month with the investment people. And one of the things I find really difficult about it, I mean, it's a great ideals, but what's really difficult about it is it's subjective in many cases. What I believe is socially responsible, Regent Johnson might not, or Regent Beeson might not. And so coming together and finding that is a work in progress, and it's tough work. So I just want you to know that we are doing that. We work with other elements. And finally, my last thing, all of our campuses, I believe, I want to just touch on diversity for a minute. We need to be welcoming to all students. All students, no questions. Specifically to the Twin Cities campus, we have a very, very urban environment. We are a land-grant school that admits about 65% Minnesotans. I'd like it to be maybe a little bit higher, but we struggle with that. But I want to make sure that we, in your point, you want to reflect the society at large. I think we not only have to know that we have an urban campus, but we have suburban students that want to come there, and we have, from where I'm from, rural Minnesota or greater Minnesota students. So when we talk about diversity, I heard a lot today about race and ethnicity, but I heard nothing about geographic thing, and I think that's something we always have to keep in mind. I'll conclude my remarks.
Thank you, Regent Anderson. Again, I'd give the student representatives a chance to respond if you'd like to.
Thank you, Regent Anderson. I grew up in Montevideo, Minnesota. Went to school at the U of M Morris. I am of greater Minnesota. And so I certainly agree. And actually, one of the things I've really appreciated in past discussions of this board regarding diversity and inclusion is recognizing geographic diversity as well. So what you have voiced and what I know Regent Swigum has voiced in the past has not gone unrecognized on the part of the student representatives. Thank you.
All right. Before I call on Regent Hsu to wrap up, I wanted to be sure I don't forget our colleagues on the phone, Regents Swigum and Cohen. If you have any thoughts on this, please just interrupt, okay? So I don't know that we're thinking of you, but if we don't hear from you, I won't call on you. Regent Hsu?
All right.
Go ahead. Regent Cohen. I hear a voice there.
Right, this is Regent Cohen, and this is a quick follow-up on the discussion about geographic diversity, and I agree how important it is, and also not only the geographic diversity that comes from having Minnesota students, but also the geographic diversity that comes from having students across the United States and the world. So I just want to emphasize that point too, and thank you, student reps, for all your hard work and your great report.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. Regent Swigum, did you have anything? You don't need to. I just don't want to forget.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And let me add my thanks to the student representatives for the report. I think they respectfully and appropriately made requests. I think specifically to the requests that were shared with us by Vice Chair Ulen. I know we're all aware of this, that life is full of choices, and choices have consequences. All choices have consequences in life. When she was speaking about the specific studies, the requests of positions, the requests of space, the requests of centers, they don't all come free, which I'm sure everybody's aware of, and we just need to make sure that we balance the choice being made with the consequence of potential tuition increases on our fellow students, tuition and student debt, which I hear from many students and parents about, and I just want to add that the comments of balance to the requests which are brought forward.
Thank you, Regent Swigum. And Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, presenters, and all the other student reps who contributed to this fine report. Appreciate your efforts. I just want to first echo all the, speaking last, I can say I agree with all the comments before me, but I did want to drill down a little bit on, you do make reference to the fact that, we have made progress in the past on policies against sexual assault and also supporting mental health services. And we're coming into a budget cycle now. In May, we'll start talking more seriously about that. But I just want to take your temperature, if you will, on how well we're doing in those areas. I know that wasn't a big focus of your report, but you do acknowledge that we're making progress. Have we made enough progress? Are we doing okay? Do we need to do better? Are more resources needed, specifically in the mental health area? As you know, we have increased funding for those areas or that area, and I think the waiting lists, waiting lines have gone down, but I'm not sure that they're at the right place yet.
Representative Uland or Preston?
So, as you will see, there are 8 authors on this report, and so I think that to answer your question, Regent Hsu, can we maybe invite some of the other regions, other student representatives, regarding this question of regarding sexual assault, whether or not we've made sufficient progress, whether or not there's more to be done? Because I know that's not something we directly address here. Didn't mean to put my colleagues on the spot. I will say that when it came to drafting this report, there are no dearth of issues of which students have concerns about, and this report could be twice as long, 3 times as long, and so sometimes some things that might otherwise be deserving of attention we couldn't do. So.
All right, proceed with a quick answer. We do need to keep moving here.
So to briefly talk about sexual assault, there has been an array of responses. I can't necessarily speak across the system because each respective campus has different capacities to respond to questions of sexual assault. Specifically talking about the Twin Cities campus, we know that the Aurora Center continues to do fantastic work in terms of responding to cases of sexual assault. We additionally know that there are a number of campaigns that will be occurring this spring and throughout the 2018-2019 school year, raising awareness about consent and how to navigate issues of sexual misconduct as well. I know that this is not necessarily the case on the other system campuses in terms of their capacity and resources to respond to cases of sexual assault. I can't necessarily speak for all of the system campuses, but that, to my knowledge, is the situation. Additionally, to my understanding, I believe that the Aurora Center on the Twin Cities campus continues to be working under a deficit, so they do have issues with funding and their capacity to serve all of the students on the Twin Cities campus. And I believe Nina would know a little bit more about this as well.
And I would add specifically that the Minnesota Student Association is currently working on a resolution to say that we support the Aurora Center's request for additional staffing, specifically staffing that has cultural competency training, and they also want to go and invest in a new program that would increase students' abilities to report incidents of sexual violence on campus. And these are both things that you guys will be seeing in the next month. So keep an eye out on the daily.
In regard to your question about just overall mental health, we have actually been looking into that, and that was one of the topics we considered when we were looking at topics for this report. However, we feel that there's definitely been progress made, and that is completely thanks to the past reports and thanks to all of you for your hard work for that. And I believe that we'll be providing an update here soon on the mental health situation across the system. So stay tuned, I guess.
All right, I'm going to wrap this up, and you've heard a heartfelt thanks from all of the board, and that is real. So great work.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Don't forget your admonition from the Honorable Judge Brocha there, too, about the 30-day follow-up. So, okay.
What's going on here? They're on break.
Well, I think we still have a quorum. But,
Did I do something?
Yeah, what'd you do over there, Regent Beeson?
Actually, technically, no.
Well, we've got two on the phone.
Okay.
So we're still fine. All right. Now I'd like to invite Vice President Levine to join us for the second of 5 system-wide strategic planning presentations. This one focusing on research and discovery. Welcome, Vice President Levine and President Kaler. Any introductory comments here?
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I do have a few minutes of comments just to sort of frame this up with your indulgence. So I want to just review where we stand on our system-wide strategic planning activities. I'm pleased with the progress we're making, and we're keeping to the timeline that we detailed to the board last fall. So the diagram in front of you represents the structure in which we're building the plan, and as you see at the highest level, a system-wide strategic planning process is rooted in our mission and guiding principles. And very clearly, the mission states our work is to be carried out on multiple campuses and throughout the state, and at its core, it's threefold: research and discovery, teaching and learning, outreach, and public service. Our guiding principles demand a respectful institution committed to academic freedom, one that partners with many communities and organizations, and one that truly inspires. Our work is also grounded in the purpose of the system, which was developed for and defined in the strategic framework conducted last year by former UMR Chancellor Lemkuhl and Vice Provost Ropers-Hillman. And from their work, which included listening to stakeholders on all 5 of our campuses, they determined that the distinctiveness of our campuses and the comprehensive and distributed nature of our system allow the University of Minnesota to be greater than the sum of its parts. They saw a system that will connect and leverage its distinctive statewide resources, that will conduct and disseminate globally significant research, produce inspiring works of visual and performing art, and offer extension and outreach programming that enhances the quality of life in Minnesota, the nation, and the world. And so that's where this work begins, on those foundations. And since then, my staff and senior leaders have developed a draft vision statement, if I'd have the next slide, that we offer here. I don't intend to wordsmith this with you today, but would be eager for your feedback and conversations outside of this venue. I think it's a good vision statement: 5 unique campuses and 1 comprehensive system. The University of Minnesota, in italics, provides world-class education, and you have already read the rest. The first reference to Minnesota is italicized for a reason. It's intended to emphasize our public university status and our commitment to the people of the state. I've said it often in the past, and it's true. We are not simply the University of Minnesota. This university is Minnesota. So with this vision in place, if you'll go back a slide, we can turn to our system-level priorities. Now, the foundation of the strategic plan will be these priorities, and will tether our fundamental decision documents, including the biennial budget requests and the annual operating capital budgets, to the system-level priorities. So as planned and scheduled last fall, we're making progress in mapping out these priorities. At our meeting last month, Vice President for University Relations Kramer kicked off our 5 sessions that have and will develop from 5 focus areas. Today, we'll hear from Vice President Levine in a minute around research. We'll meet in May, and Medical School Dean Tolar will present the medicine and health update. In June, Provost Hanson will provide teaching and learning updates. And at the July board meeting, Senior Vice President Burnett will use all that information to present you the beginnings of how we will support the mission going forward. And we will develop draft documents and share them with you throughout the course of this.
All of the work will inform us as we head towards the plan that will be finalized for September and show alignment with our 2020-21 biennial budget request. And in October, we'll bring the plan and the budget request to you for action. And Mr. Chair, members of the board, key staff members in each of these units, from my office, OVPR, Provost, University Relations, Finance and Operations, and the AHC are working hard on this initiative. And we'd like to say that we are so far under budget and on time as we get our arms around this important planning effort that will craft a thoughtful future for our entire 5-campus university system. So with that, I will turn over to Vice President Levine, with your permission, Chair.
Vice President Levine, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Mr. President. Thanks for that introduction. It's my pleasure to be here today to put forward our plan. As you can see on this slide, we begin with a brief overview of the main insights of the system-wide strategic framework with a review of our charge, and we'll share with you how we approached our work. We'll then move on to describing the process for selecting research priorities and how MnDRIVE can serve as a model to successfully launch and oversee state investments in priority areas. We will present priority areas that are important to the state and where we feel that additional investments will have impact. We will then review with you existing investment criteria for how we make investment decisions once these priorities are identified, and then end with a list of recommendations that address our charge and that are necessary to support those strategic priorities. Our office is a system-wide office, and as Vice President for Research, it's my role to ensure that we are leveraging all parts of the system to their fullest when it comes to strategically investing in research and in identifying priorities. The most recent economic impact report shows how our partnerships and our location have a tangible impact on the state. According to the economic impact study we commissioned in 2017, direct and indirect impact of faculty, staff, and students performing research totaled $1.2 billion, and sponsored research supported 11,279 jobs throughout the state. We are excited about the opportunity to identify priorities and make specific recommendations for this system-wide strategic plan. We see this as a way to continue and grow the impact we have on the state by coming together as a system to address statewide issues. I wanted to ground today's discussion in the strategic planning work and SWOT analysis that was done last year under the leadership of Vice Provost for Faculty and Academic Affairs, Rebecca Ropers-Hullman, and then University of Minnesota Rochester Chancellor Stephen Lemkuhl. They identified the strengths shown in this slide. We are a top 10 public research university with excellent faculty, staff, and students across our system. Because of this comprehensiveness, we have broad and deep impacts. Our campuses pride themselves in their distinctiveness, which gives unique advantages to each of the campuses. Our office has primarily administrative and service functions, and we are committed to effectively supporting the university's mission across the system. And let's not forget that we live in a state with strong support for higher education. This state support includes support for research, including MnDRIVE, which I'll be talking about later. Our strengths have allowed us to build many mutually beneficial partnerships across the state. A SWOT analysis would not be complete if it didn't identify current challenges across the system. Some of the challenges are there simply because of the size differential between the Twin Cities campus and the system campuses. Others are caused by our aging infrastructure. The work we are presenting here took the insights of the SWOT analysis forward into our recommendations. Finally, I want to show today how our charge builds on the recommendations from the 2017 framework and advances it further towards actions we need to take to realize the promise of a system-wide strategic plan. Let me review with you now the charge I was given. President Kaler asked our office to lead the development of the university's system-wide strategic priorities in research and discovery. We were asked to address the 4 categories that you see listed on this slide. These categories are enablers of research and discovery, internal funding for research and entrepreneurial activities, talent recruitment and retention, technology commercialization and economic development, and reviewing our centers and institutes. In each case, we were asked to review the current state and then come up with recommendations that would bring the system together to increase the strategic plans of all 5 campuses and the research strategic plan developed back in 2013. We emphasized to each team that the goal is not to come up with another strategic plan, but to synthesize the information across those documents and identify the key actions that would have statewide impact and leverage the strengths of the system. Each team followed the 3 steps outlined in this slide. The synthesis and affirmation step included the review of the current strategic plans and the system-wide strategic framework, followed by a validation and affirmation of our current priorities and performance measures. During the iteration and integration step, we jointly developed a consultation process. We developed a short list of research priorities based on what we heard back from colleges and campuses. This then informed our recommendations of specific actions that we see as necessary for the priorities to have an impact. We will iterate this in the coming months as we integrate our recommendations with the other focus areas. The final step is review and approval. This is an ongoing process, and you can see that today's presentation is part of that step. Many of us have been part of past research prioritization teams. When selecting priority areas, we have traditionally followed a process driven by an alignment between strengths and impact. We look at areas where we have depth in the faculty. We also look at areas that are important to the state, its economy, and its well-being, and areas where we have or could have global impact. We consider student interest, and we look at how the priorities align with the system vision. Finally, we evaluate the priorities based on how they will enhance the system's reputation in the state and beyond. You are well aware that as a university, we often struggle with articulating priorities. Not that we don't have priorities, but we often feel that by naming some research areas and not others, we disenfranchise those who work in the areas that are not mentioned. It is therefore very important to me to say here clearly that as a comprehensive university, we work in many areas that are of local, national, or global importance, whether or not these areas are explicitly brought out as priorities. This strategic plan has a focus on the economic impact in our state, and to accomplish the impact, we will need to focus on a select and small number of areas that are important to the state and require additional state funding to accomplish. The additional funding is needed either because the areas are emerging and need funds to get going, or their importance is mostly restricted to our state, and so federal funding would likely not be available. Let me pivot now to the next part of my presentation, where I would like to reframe the very successful MnDrive program, which will serve as a model that we can use for future priority areas. So bear with me while I explain what I mean by that. In 2012, when I was Dean of CFANS, I was part of the planning group that was asked to identify priorities with statewide impact. We proposed the MnDrive program, with which you are all very familiar. And I have to say that this program has proven to be successful beyond the expectations of my colleagues and me. This is why I want to talk to you today about how MnDrive serves as a model for deepening the university's strengths. MnDrive has provided us with a template to focus on areas that are important to the state of Minnesota. It's a way to grow our impact, especially where federal and other national funding is hard to come by because of reasons I mentioned earlier. Though, as you already know, the research conducted under MnDrive has built strengths and established credibility through results that later attracted national funding. MnDrive is also an example of our ability to be agile and to readily address needs quickly. The funding opportunity got off to a very fast start with results coming in quickly. This is important for us to be able to do. Research universities are at times asked to step into solving problems or addressing societal needs quickly, whether it is bird flu or the current opioid crisis. You have seen a similar slide before in the December presentation of our annual research report. MnDrive is an $18 million annual state investment with an additional $4 million annually added in 2017 for cancer trial initiatives. Over the course of this program, 767 people have been hired to directly do the work of these projects, including 31 new faculty. In addition, over 1,000 of our current researchers have been involved from 100-plus departments across 3 of our campuses. MnDrive supports graduate students, and we have seen 60 trainees move to positions at Boston Scientific, Ecolab, Sundial, REG Life Sciences, and others. MnDrive has done very well attracting additional funding. This past year, our researchers garnered an additional $44 million in external funding. While it is impossible to say whether we would have gotten this funding without MnDrive support, we do believe that the funding we received from the state played an important role in being competitive for external funding. MnDrive has a focus on the innovation economy, and so I am very happy to report that the research under MnDrive has led to 70 invention disclosures this past year alone. New this year is the Cancer Trial Initiative, which has gotten off to a successful start with clinical trials at 15 sites serving 47 Minnesota counties. Let me summarize the main ingredients that we feel made MnDrive so successful. I want to spend a little bit of time on this since we want to use this framework going forward to enhance not only the existing MnDrive areas, but also to employ this framework on new emerging areas. So here we go. The state investments were aligned with areas where we were able to build on existing research excellence. The funding led to exciting research. The funding was also used to invest in our research infrastructure. This is a theme you will hear repeatedly. Much of research today, especially in the sciences and engineering, requires significant investments in infrastructure, not just people. The success of this model can be seen in the outcome measures I showed you. We closely tracked outcome measures and talked to our researchers to understand better the factors that facilitate the success of this type of research. I will mention these factors briefly in the next slide, which goes into more detail on the first 2 steps outlined here. I don't want to rehash what I just said in the previous slide, but would like to focus your attention briefly on the middle part of this slide. These are the factors that our researchers told us that facilitated the research. MnDrive research is targeted, has a focus on importance to the state and economic impact. This has been well received by our research community engaged in such research. It encouraged risk-taking in emerging areas and led to new collaborations. They feel inspired by the challenges and the impact. To achieve the outcomes you saw, we leveraged the full range of research support, from core research services to technology commercialization, and built connections both within our research community and with businesses in Minnesota. You have seen the numbers that show how many researchers have been involved and what they achieve in collaboration within their research community and Minnesota businesses to solve local problems, disclose new licenses, file for patents, start new companies, and garner additional external funding. To make these numbers come to life, let me tell you a couple of success stories. A team of University of Minnesota researchers across 2 campuses, both the Twin Cities campus and Morris, are developing a new wind energy-based method of producing the ammonia for nitrogen fertilizer, a key agricultural input that doesn't rely on natural gas and on coal. This addresses a pressing need for sustainable fertilizer. The project brought together researchers from a wide variety of disciplines, including engineering, applied economics, policy, and agriculture. This created unexpected synergies and new and serendipitous inspiration. Results from a multiple-site clinical study that was co-led by the University of Minnesota and the University of California led to FDA approval of Boston Scientific's Versailles Deep Brain Stimulation System. As you've heard before, deep brain stimulation uses electric current in precise areas of the brain to reduce involuntary shaking and other Parkinson's symptoms. A neurosurgery team at the University of Minnesota was the first to successfully implant this device outside of clinical studies. As you can imagine, it is very rewarding for researchers to improve the lives of Parkinson's patients. Now, let me remind you briefly of our two-pronged task: identifying new priorities and enablers for their impact. We'll start with the priorities. The current MnDRIVE areas, which you know and can see on the slide, continue to provide us with important opportunities for impact, and we truly appreciate the recurrent funding we have received from the state to continue our efforts in this. There are emerging areas that we prioritize based on discussions with academic leaders. These include opioid addiction and aging, both areas that are of great importance to our state and are already part of our medical discovery teams. This is a topic of system-wide interest and research capacity. You might remember a feature story on the university's homepage about a study on the risk factors of addiction conducted by a Rochester campus faculty member. Intelligent systems, such as the Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, and other data-driven systems we increasingly interact with, have the promise of significant impact, and our state needs to be a player in the new economy. Renewable energy and sustainability is not a new area, but continues to offer new opportunities across our system. For instance, as you know, the Morris campus has a strong focus on sustainability. Likewise, medical devices and systems are not new to our state, but there continue to be new opportunities, especially if we think more broadly about the biotech industry. Data sciences and data management are the basis of much of the new high-tech industry that is developing and is key to making progress in the areas I already mentioned. This is also an area where we need to train our workforce in Minnesota. All of our campuses can make important contributions to this need. Finally, we should leverage the university's significant strength in the social sciences, law, and policy, because understanding and finding solutions for social disparities is critically important to the well-being of our state. In the current MnDRIVE areas and the emerging priorities, there are opportunities to engage the social sciences, the arts and the humanities, law and policy to a much greater degree than what we often see in sciences and engineering-focused research areas because of MnDRIVE's emphasis on having direct impact on our state and on our economy. Translating discoveries of basic research into solutions is not just about solving an engineering problem. It's fundamentally about people and about their behavior. There also continue to be opportunities for new public-private partnerships and leveraging of external funding opportunities. Let me now turn to the last part of my presentation, namely specific recommendations that our 4 focus teams have developed to enable the success of the priorities that I mentioned, and more broadly of our research enterprise to bring us together as a system for system-wide, statewide impact. Let me illustrate how we think about the process using opioid addiction as an example. I mentioned this area as one of the emerging priorities, and coincidentally, it is also related to my own area of research. The 4 areas that our team addressed are listed in the rows in this table. Let's look at the first one, funding. To carry out research on opioid addiction, we need to determine whether the funding is in place, whether it needs to be developed, expanded, or reallocated from other funding. We need to ask the same questions for the other 4 areas. Let me now go into the specific recommendations for each of the 4 areas. The teams followed the process I outlined at the beginning of my presentation. What I am showing you now are the highlights of the recommendations to enable the success of our investments. Aligning internal research funding with system-wide priorities and connecting faculty across the system to respond to the funding, together with tracking outcomes and return on investment, is the gist of the first set of recommendations. What we invest in follows well-established criteria, which are summarized in the next slide. We have used these criteria for a long time across the university, including our own Office for Research Infrastructure Investments. You see familiar words: quality, centrality, comparative advantage, synergies, and demand. The second team is developing recommendations for research talent and recruitment. This has multiple components. Recruiting and retaining faculty in areas where we have explicit priorities is important to deliver on the investments, but this is not enough. As a university, we need to create an environment where we can recruit and retain diverse faculty and staff. And we need academic leadership that supports such a culture. Mentoring and professional development are an important part of this. To have a statewide impact, we need to make sure our discoveries across the system can get out into the marketplace. This set of recommendations focuses on leveraging research parks, small business development centers, and local business incubators for technology commercialization and economic development across the locations of our campuses. We also want to do more to support undergraduate student startup initiatives and research system-wide. All campuses fit into this, not just the Twin Cities campus. For instance, Rochester students have opportunities with their own faculty and researchers at Mayo Clinic to participate in research projects in the health sciences. Duluth students have already taken advantage of the current opportunities in the environment area. Morris students have opportunities in robotics, food, environment, and if we include new priorities, renewable energy and sustainability. Crookston students are already collaborating with students across the border in North Dakota on building drones, thus doing research in the current MnDrive area of robotics. On all campuses, there are opportunities for business collaborations. We should consider this colocalization model system-wide, where companies have physical presence on our campuses. The fourth and final set of recommendations addresses how we can use our centers and institutes better across the system. This team found a need for facilitating access to core facilities across our campuses. Their use is available to all campuses, but due to the distance, researchers from system-wide campuses cannot easily visit a core facility on the Twin Cities campus to get advice on how to best design an experiment to use the facility. Also, many of our core facilities are challenged by a shortage of PhD-level staff who can provide such consultations. Technology can help to ease the communication barriers, and we need to expand those. But this still leaves a need for funds for in-person visits. Technology-facilitated communication would also make it easier for collaborations across the system. Instrumentation is an important part of research, in particular in the sciences and engineering. We spend millions of dollars each year on new equipment. While some, especially the more expensive ones, end up in core facilities, there is a need to equip researchers' labs. This leads to underutilized equipment. Having a map that would allow researchers to identify whether another lab has a piece of equipment that they will use occasionally could reduce the duplication of equipment and thus reduce cost. Finally, we heard that there is a need to make used instrumentation available across the system. Not everyone needs to buy a new piece of equipment if there is another lab that has a used one that still works but is no longer needed. An exchange program where we sell instrumentation internally could save money as well. So, members of the board, here's where we are now. We've reviewed the system-wide research strategies. We've evaluated the level of system-wide access to research administration services and technology commercialization expertise and support. We've conducted campus visits and contacted respective campus leads to get input on recommendation. We've consulted with several legislators on research priorities and MnDrive. We've evaluated potential research priorities and identified what would enable the success of these. And finally, we've evaluated the success measures and performance tracking models. We've set a date of June 1st for our teams to deliver their final reports. We will use the next couple of months to complete our work in progress, to align our plan with the other system-wide strategic plan focus areas in medicine and health, teaching and learning, outreach and public service, and supporting the mission. And we will meet with faculty governance groups and conduct academic leader consultations. Thanks so much for your attention, and I'll look forward to your questions and input.
Thank you, Dr. Levine. I appreciate how you went through a pretty comprehensive and lengthy swath of information there, reflecting what I know is a fair amount of work. I have one comment, and then I'm going to open it up to the board, but I'm going to caution all of our colleagues here, we need to keep moving this morning, and as this is a work in progress, I'll frame mine. You don't need, I actually will ask you not to answer, but just recognize, as I go back to the selecting priorities area slide, my question, or perhaps it's more feedback than question, is how do we could be short faculty in an area for any number of reasons that is of utmost importance to the state and our land grant mission. And my curiosity is, what's the cart and the horse in that equation? Because if it's important to the state, we need to find faculty and students and resources to deal with it. But if we don't have the faculty, would we continue to push it down? So I don't know that these are in rank order. You didn't intend them to be, but as we bring this in now for, towards a landing at some point of the overall system plan, know that this region will be looking for how you determine what's important to the state and how we properly resource after it, even if we're short resources today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Dr. Levine. I appreciate the substantial work that has gone into this. I'm especially happy that we've established these criteria, right? And you're starting to go through this process. And to some extent, I guess I will have a question, and before I forget it. When we get to the final report, I'm interested, if you could, when I conclude my remarks here, give a sense of what we're going to get in that final report, sort of the level of granularity to understand. I also understand there's some sensitivity when you talk about those kinds of specifics, because some folks will perceive winners and maybe we'll call them less winners when you talk about that focus for our ongoing investment. I'm very much looking forward to that report. As you know, I've been something of an interest to me and to the board now for some time. One of the things that, and I would input this because we've got all these moving parts in trying to develop a system-wide strategic plan to ensure that we are maximizing not only the state investment, student investment, philanthropic investment in the University of Minnesota, but also being a part of the state overall ecosystem, I think was the word used yesterday, of higher education. And I think that's the best way to put it. So it's very complex, and so I understand and I appreciate how hard it is to kind of get to that focus in this particular area. Taking you back to the complexity, as we go through this, I approach the research component of the university not only as being sort of a singular asset among all the institutions in the state in being able to drive this kind of innovation and this kind of return for the state's investment, but it also makes the university unique in terms of its undergraduate and graduate education. And so if we go forward, as we go forward, if we can keep that in mind, that it's not necessarily just kind of independent of that. Part of the reason why we ask the state to provide the kind of support to the university that the state provides, even though we have on a student numbers basis far fewer than the other publics, a big part of that is because we provide a unique education, and it does coordinate with this research component. So that would be one of the things that I would like to really see emphasized is, as this goes forward, how does this not only translate into these returns to the state for this, for the investment and all the other folks that are investing in this enterprise, but also how does that make us unique and complement the educational excellence that we have in specific areas. So just wanted to make that comment, but I appreciate the sensitivity and being able to identify these different priorities, the sensitivity, and talking about them in a way that doesn't make anybody within the environment feel as though what they're doing is not valued, because clearly if it wasn't valued it wouldn't be supported as it is. But I think that this is a good description of how to make these evaluations. I look forward to that, with also that competency for the educational part of what we do as an institution, because certainly for the people of Minnesota, they tend to see us as educational first, even though there's no question that we are singular in our ability to provide alongside this kind of innovation and research in not only just advancing the human condition, but addressing specific problems that arise. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Again, asking our colleagues on the phone if they have any input, feedback, or questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just listening here in the background, and thanks for the presentation at this point.
All right, thank you, Regent Swigum. Regent Cohen, did I hear you click on there?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair McMillan. And first of all, thanks, Dr. Levine, for a great report. I particularly like perhaps what Regent Rocha is referring to in the slide that had MnDrive, new opportunities, today's MnDrive areas, and listed those 5, and then the emerging priorities. I thought that was particularly important as priorities that most likely will be in your final report of areas that we will be developing. So I thought that was an important slide. Thanks very much.
Other board feedback? Regent Anderson.
Just very briefly, and I'm going to mention this because it's always music to Regent Swigum's ears if we could save some money. One of the slides had a deal where you are potentially inventorying lab equipment to know, and as you know, Vice President Levine, I kind of make a nuisance of myself down at Office of Technology and Commercialization because I love the stuff that's going on down there. And I've been down there when I said, well, what would you need to do your program? And people say, well, I need this piece of equipment that will cost $35,000 and I just don't have that. I think it's really important that if we have not inventoried, we're a big footprint campus when you consider we have stuff in Crookston and Morris and Rochester and all around Minneapolis, St. Paul, that you inventory what equipment we do have, so some other person that has a great idea that needs this piece of equipment to test something would know where they could get one. So is that a somewhat new priority, or have we not had that kind of list?
Mr. Chair, Regent Anderson.
Dr. Levine.
Regents. We have a type of inventory associated with it. It's not comprehensive, and we're trying to also put a map together with the help of USpatial, an organization within the university that can map those things. And then people can actually look it up, find out where it is, call and say, can I use it?
I think that's a great idea. I mean, something we should have thought about a long time ago, quite frankly, but keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Anderson. Regent Omari.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, and thank you for the presentation. I think the 2 slides that were most helpful for me to think about this, I think they're back-to-back. Actually, one is that talks about the number of jobs, measured performance, on and so forth for MnDrive, coupled with the emerging priorities. And so I first want to point out that we've hired a lot of people due to MnDrive, right? And so headcount growing is not always a bad thing. Just want to make that reference because then the work is beneficial. And then 2, as we take that and look at it, and maybe this might be what Regent Rocha was getting at, and I don't know if this is a question or not. It is. Are we going to be able to use this measured performance to then break out these emerging priorities and say from opioid addiction, we want to grow in this way, which would likely require estimate this amount of money, estimate this amount of faculty hired, estimate this amount of researchers, so on. Is that what we're going to be able to expect in the final report?
Dr. Levine.
Mr. Chair, Regent Omari, Regents. The final report will include ways to do that, but we have already done that kind of evaluation. So, for example, in the area, and Chair McMillan asked about this, in the area of robotics, we hired faculty because we were undersourced in that area. We didn't have enough, and we knew that artificial intelligence, robotics, intelligent systems were important arenas. So yes, you have to evaluate your current strengths, look where you are shallow in certain areas to fill in that, and then request funding or go for external funds.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are going to move on. Thank you very much. And address our next topic. I mentioned in my opening remarks some of the things that struck me and my colleagues about the faculty, staff, and student body here at the University of Minnesota Rochester. And now I'd like to invite our expert on the University of Minnesota Rochester and our leader, Chancellor Carroll, to the presenters table to talk about the future of and her vision for the university here. And before you begin, I think President Kaler has some thoughts to further frame the conversation. President Kaler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's fair to say these past 2 days have confirmed the vitality, upward trajectory, and the deep community roots that UMR owns. This campus, students, faculty, and staff are in steady and good hands with our new Chancellor, Lori Carroll. She's a champion of collaboration and innovation, and she's well known and well liked in the city of Rochester. So thank you, Chancellor, for the warm welcome you and your team have provided for all of us, and we look forward to your presentation.
Dr. Carroll, Chancellor Carroll.
Chair McMillan, Regents, President Kaler, honored guests and colleagues, thank you for your presence here in Rochester and your interest in the UMR vision. What a pleasure to tell the story of the Rochester campus of the world-class University of Minnesota and to foreshadow future plot developments. Some of you here today in Phillips Hall were characters in the first few chapters of this tale. Those early characters included regents and system leaders, key government officials, engaged citizen advocates working over decades, a futurist founding chancellor who sends his greetings. Trailblazing faculty and staff, many community partners, and importantly, courageous students. Can you imagine being in that first class in 2009? The UMR story is a tale of adventure, and we're just getting started. First, the setting of UMR's story, this vibrant city of 114,000 located in a thriving region of the state, a point of pride for Minnesotans. Annually, this region welcomes approximately 2.75 million visitors from around the world, and its resident population is growing as well, with a 24% increase in the last 10 years. What a context. A supportive city, including sales tax support, thank you. The Destination Medical Center endeavor, the skilled workforce demand, the ongoing collaborative spirit among community leaders across education, government, industry, and nonprofits. This place is ideal for a University of Minnesota campus also committed to care and innovation. So that's our setting and the plot developments to date. If it's been a while since you read those early UMR chapters, let me catch you up quickly. UMR has launched. We are structurally sound. We have expectations for strategic enrollment growth. We've graduated 5 classes with alumni employed in healthcare or continuing their education in that direction. UMR faculty are creating and discovering innovations to fuel student success. We've been accredited jointly with the Twin Cities campus. Our public-private partnership approach to facilities is established and will remain a guiding principle. And very importantly, we have a diverse student body with strong success for underrepresented students in a rigorous degree program. I want to call your attention to the center of this slide. There you can see UMR graduate Muna Always. Muna, who's now a researcher at the School of Dentistry, and all of our students are at the center of our vision. These passionate, resilient students are the inspiration for our faculty and staff. I think you enjoyed interacting with some of them yesterday. Surrounding Muna, you see individuals who represent those who make UMR a reality. There's a founding faculty member, a Distinguished Teaching Award winner, a health and wellness specialist, a student success coach, and a student-based faculty who spends much of his life at the Just Ask Center, which our graduates say is the #1 reason for their success. This UMR story is a page-turner. Throughout our short history and at the heart of our vision for the future is a deep commitment. The learning and development of students comes first. As a University of Minnesota campus in a setting devoted to care and innovation, we have a distinctive vision. to inspire transformation in higher education through innovations that empower our graduates to solve the grand health challenges of the 21st century. This vision is driving our strategic growth. When we look broadly at the challenges in the healthcare industry and in higher education, there are some similarities. Challenges with funding, policy ambiguity, issues of access and inclusion, rapidly emerging technologies, cost, and public trust, to name a few. In the context of these grand challenges in healthcare and higher education, the University of Minnesota Rochester has been launched through collective striving, and we are flourishing. Now we have the grand opportunity to sustain the momentum of this innovative campus so that we make progress in the direction of our vision. Why a vision focused on health? Well, the demand for a skilled healthcare workforce is extreme in our state and beyond. At UMR, it's the quality and diversity of that emerging workforce on which we focus. As we do our part, the undergraduate portion, we're aiming for graduates characterized by curiosity, creativity, compassion, collaboration, courage, and commitment. Because even more extreme than the healthcare workforce demand are the health challenges themselves, including mental illness and addiction in its many forms. Those who will solve these challenges begin their higher education as undergraduates. And if even one young Minnesotan with the potential to contribute to solving such healthcare challenges, even one, cannot complete their undergraduate education, we have squandered our most precious resource. That's the primary reason that UMR's vision includes a focus on educational innovation. The University of Minnesota is well known for being driven to discover. UMR's piece of that abiding commitment is to create and discover innovations that fuel all students' success. Our choices about how students are educated at UMR emanate from evidence. Some examples: traditionally aged first-year students are more likely to succeed if they have close relationships with faculty, they know where to go for support, they participate in research, they engage in active rather than passive learning, they have common intellectual experiences with their peers, they experience a sense of belonging and accountability, and they are civically engaged, and the list goes on. UMR faculty are contributing to this important body of knowledge about student success. In the meantime, we are collectively committed to providing evidence-based, success-fueling practices for 100% of our students, not a select few. As you are aware, historically in higher education, some students have not had the same access or success as others. The word underrepresented is familiar and is used to acknowledge this sad reality that students of color, students eligible for Pell Grants, and students who are the first generation in their family to attend college are not as likely to complete an undergraduate degree as their peers. True nationally and true in Minnesota. As the demographics of high school graduates shift to include more students with these characteristics and backgrounds, the systemic and complex challenge will intensify. Many of us in higher education have accepted the responsibility to seek solutions to this persistent problem, working to discover how we can do better with all students. At UMR, given our size, our academic focus, and the system's support, we have the privilege and agility to test best practices in undergraduate education. In addition to our focus on learning, we are also exploring innovative approaches to campus structures, governance, habits of interaction that fuel innovation, and campus facilities that leverage partnerships for long-term savings. I want to call your attention to one of our many innovations, UMR's academic programs. First, the Bachelor of Science in Health Professions, a partnership program with the Mayo Clinic School of Health Sciences. These UMR graduates enter careers immediately following their 4-year degree, and to date, 100% are employed in their fields. And then there's the stunningly creative Bachelor of Science in Health Science, with health and wellness embedded in core coursework and a customized senior year. This beautiful blend of science and the arts and humanity, this carefully crafted, efficient degree program provides the pathway into a multitude of health science-related careers. And I want to underscore the cost-saving efficiency of this innovative degree program. More than 90% of our graduates have completed this degree in 4 years or less, saving them student loan debt and saving their families. The list of possible healthcare careers was too long to fit on one slide. So instead, I'll illustrate 3 types of pathways for BSHS grads, including patient care, research, and health policy. Katie Nelson is a UMR grad who found her way to direct patient care. As a first-year student, Katie's journey with her grandparents through the end of their lives caused her to struggle academically, but it also led her to palliative care. In her capstone year, Katie worked with one of our many community partners, Seasons Hospice. As she completes her degree in nursing, Katie has this to say about the UMR vision. My undergrad career started off very rocky, so I'm extremely grateful. I felt supported every step of the way. UMR is an incredibly unique place. It breeds strong-willed, optimistic, curious world changers. Jake Anderson became captivated by research in his first semester organic chemistry course. He says, this early exposure opened my eyes to the awe-inspiring elegance with which organic chemistry affects biological systems. During his senior year capstone, he conducted research in a renal physiology lab at Mayo Clinic and then was accepted into their post-bac research program. Committed to a career in healthcare research, he's working now toward a joint MD PhD. Says Anderson, my experience at the University of Minnesota Rochester has been ideal. Nicole Vang represents another type of pathway in the BSHS degree at UMR, public policy and health. Nicole credits her success to her connection with other students who share her passion to study health. During her undergraduate years with us, she volunteered at the Ronald McDonald House and the Gift of Life Transplant House, located just a few walkable blocks from 318 Commons. During her capstone, Nicole served as an intern in the office of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, working with a team to increase health insurance coverage in those communities. Nicole is currently completing her master's in healthcare administration while working at Blue Cross Blue Shield, and next up for Nicole is law school. We're proud of Katie and Jake and Nicole and all of our graduates. Their diverse paths demonstrate the vision-driven flexibility of UMR's innovative BSHS degree. Building on that vision, the UMR community is nearing completion of our strategic growth plan. We began by coming to consensus on our grounding values, and these are important. Respect, human potential, community, diversity and inclusiveness, evidence-based decision-making. Then we crafted our centering aspirations. Regents, you have the full description in your materials, but I'll just summarize these centering aspirations. UMR will devote our expertise and energy to student learning and development, increase our enrollment of passionate, resilient students, enhance the diversity of the healthcare workforce, and contribute to renewal in higher education and the continued development of this region of Minnesota. So, what can you expect as the plot thickens in UMR's story? We are currently collecting evidence to inform next steps in key areas: enrollment, facilities, fundraising, continued innovation, and our strategic growth plan. For enrollment, we're working with system colleagues on the Optimal Size Project. Thank you, Lynn Carlson. For fundraising supported by the University Foundation, we're engaged in an assessment of our resource generation potential. For facilities, we will be guided by our vision and 3 key principles: location, partnerships, and stewardship. Our location, downtown Rochester, is our home. Our partnerships, we're looking for partners academically and otherwise who support our vision, like 318 Commons, that public-private partnership, and the proposed long-term lease of Discovery Square Mortensen building. And the final principle is stewardship. Prudent financial decision-making for the long term is our principle. You know we're pressed for hooded lab classroom space and housing, and other space needs are sure to come. But location, partnerships, and stewardship will be the principles that guide that planning. For continued educational innovation and dissemination of related results, 2 faculty-led endeavors are in progress: the Innovation Visioning and Design Team and the Collective Learning Research Task Force. And we'll be hosting our Higher Education Innovation Summit this June. For our campus strategic growth plan, we near completion, and in June we'll connect to the overarching system strategic plan in progress. We are grateful for the privilege to pursue our distinct vision in Rochester. It's made possible by system resources, including administration, the Office of General Counsel, information technology, library, human resources, finance, real estate, and more. As the system strategic plan is finalized, Rochester will be an enthusiastic participant in the enhancement of intentional coordination across the campuses. Just as Rochester has a unique excellence that I've been describing, of course, so does Duluth with its natural resources research, deep community engagement, and Sea Grant distinctiveness, and Morris with its exceptional liberal arts education and commitment to Native American students, and Crookston leading the system in quality online education, and of course the Twin Cities with its extraordinary research output. As a system campus of the University of Minnesota, UMR intends to be a contributor to the overall vision of this great university. At UMR, we're inspired by our passionate, resilient students. We're compelled by the grand challenges in healthcare and higher education. And we're convinced that evidence-based innovation enhances student success. The visionary UMR story is being collectively authored by this agile, creative campus community devoted to our #1 priority, that every interaction with every student every day be evidence-driven and exemplary. May that vision continue. I appreciated our conversations yesterday and would invite such conversation to continue.
Chancellor Carroll, thank you. And I'm amazingly impressive decade plus behind you, and an amazingly optimistic decades ahead, and a lot of growth around, and it's really great to see how integral you and your team and your campus and your students are to the exciting things happening here in Rochester. So I'd love some region input, feedback, comment. I don't have anything else at this point. Colleagues? Regent Lucas.
Thank you. Is this on? Thank you, Chair McMillan. I would just say that the building blocks for your vision are obviously there. We've seen them the last couple of days. We're so impressed, and I think the future's bright, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Beeson, and then Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chancellor, and congratulations on your appointment. I'm sure you'll be successful in the years ahead. The takeaways are numerous from the last couple of days. One, it still has an entrepreneurial feel, and that's good. There's an excitement, there's energy, and there's some uncertainty, but I can't think of a better community in which to map out a growth plan than Rochester, for all the reasons that are so obvious and reinforced through the site visits that we've made. Your predecessor and the administration, I think, wisely focused this curriculum around healthcare and they've resisted this temptation to go into other areas where there might be demands, and I hope we talked a little bit about this at the briefing session, but I would hope we'll stay the course in that area. The President did mention there are separate but related areas of healthcare for people that might want to go into the business side, the management side, and right now Carlson School doesn't really offer tracks on healthcare. I think that the School of Public Health has that in some ways, but that might be of interest to people that want to go into that's just such a major part, or financial analysis, fiscal analysis, things like that. But that's a later conversation, some years down the road. Thank you again, and your staff, for hosting us here.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Chancellor Carroll, any remarks there? You don't have to make any.
Chair McMillan, Regent Beeson, thank you so much for those comments. And our focus on health is firmly in place, and as we expand our academic offerings and our research, we will be within that frame of health.
All right. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chancellor Carroll. What a great opportunity for us to be down here. I think it's been spoken to, and for me, it's very gratifying for us to be here and have the chance to interact with the campus and the community. When we talk about the 10-year path to where we are, to me, that feels like part of the story. My experience and relationship with the campus, it really is, goes back to the pre-germinated seed, going back to when the university was considering the issue of the Waseca campus, and the fact that at the time the university was moving away from the 2-year technical education as part of becoming part of a more complex higher ed ecosystem, but also to deal with the retrenchment and the cost issues that were prevalent at the time. But what was always a part of that was the fact that Rochester was the largest population center in the state that didn't have an institution of this variety. And at the time, the unofficial conversation was a bit about the fact that Rochester provided the opportunity, excuse me, to take the university's sort of focused research capacity and what we do separate from other public institutions in the state, and partner with at the time it was Mayo and IBM, and certainly that's landscape's changed a little bit since then. But as I look at what you've done, I feel like we really have been very successful at creating that relationship and leveraging the healthcare resource that Minnesota is extremely fortunate to have within our borders. That being said, I was a bit surprised when I did come back to the board that the size of the entity was what it was, and I fully agree with Regent Beeson. You would never want to sort of lose that. I mean, you would not want to lose that. But I don't necessarily think that you do by having other opportunities as well. But of course, I'm speaking a bit off the cuff. I haven't spent a lot of time speaking with community leaders as to what the expectations and desires of the community might be. I do know that there are sort of two principles that I look at. One of them is when you look at a cost per student, and when you look at across the whole system, at least in previous analyses of how programs were to be supported, that was a factor in identifying where we would be able to make additional investment and where we would make adjustments. But so in this particular case, I'm very interested in knowing what Rochester is looking to do in this whole part of the state. There are other great public institutions in the area that provide education of a certain variety. I look at, along with the things that Regent Beeson talked about that were directly related in terms of the business education, I think you also have the possibility for hospitality. As I was affected by our drive out to our dinner yesterday, that you've got all these facilities that are made to deal with families that are taking advantage of the Rochester healthcare, and those are just some things that we would have the opportunity to maybe look at. But whether the community itself can support and enhance the specialized education that we're providing by also looking at other things that Rochester and southeastern Minnesota as a community would want to see us develop. Again, speaking only for myself at this point, based on my history with the school, where what the intent was at one point in time, and where we can move from here to both address some of the cost issues, but also ensure that we're providing that support and really enhancing the Rochester and southeastern Minnesota community. Those are things that I would like to see us be very intentional about going forward.
Chancellor Carroll, some reaction?
Chair McMillan, Regent Rocha, I share your deep commitment to listening to the voices of the community in terms of the needs, and that process has been integral to the founding of UMR, and it will continue. Also true that we are part of an educational ecosystem here with great cooperation among institutions and campuses, and the leaders in those educational institutions and among community members meet regularly, and that assessment that will be ongoing from here forward as we continue our strategic planning is absolutely important, and thank you for acknowledging that.
Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, and thank you, Chancellor Carroll, and congratulations again. It's a great story. I feel like I've been binge watching it for 2 days, though, and very pleased to get the details on what's going on here. And I think one of the takeaways for me in the past 2 days is how important this community is to the success of UMR. And I know there are a lot of community members. There's legislators here and legislators last night at dinner, and county commissioners, city. The mayor, city council members, all these people are helping us make this successful, and I want to make sure we acknowledge that, and I hope that we can work in even closer partnership in the future. I know that a lot of our students end up going to work at the Mayo Clinic, and I think that's fabulous. In fact, I think it's a well-kept secret that the way into the Mayo Clinic may be through UMR, and and I know I have talked to students who said they came here specifically for that purpose, and in fact, I was surprised that we actually had students taking advantage of the PSEO program from outside of Rochester, coming down and moving here when they're 17 years old to get into or to start their education at UMR, and then completing their education at UMR, and then staying here in Rochester working at places like the Mayo Clinic. And I think it's fabulous. I think it's great that we were able to come down here for 2 days and really celebrate the success of the first 10 years. And I'm looking forward to the Optimum Size project, because I think we should be able to attract more students here and put them through our fabulous program. I think the teaching, the pedagogy, those things, the innovations regarding how you teach things like organic chemistry maybe should be taken to other parts of our university system, and hopefully there's more discussion about that in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Regent Hsu and Chancellor Carroll. We're grateful, and we're going to turn now to another key strategic priority for the university and this board and the state of Minnesota, and that is academic medicine. And I believe I saw Dr. Tolar wander in here some time ago, and I'll let the audience know that Regent Johnson is needed to get back to Wilmer, but he's on the phone with us again, I believe. So we have 3 regents on the phone, and as Dr. Tolar is getting settled here at the presenters table, I'm going to ask President Kaler to frame the conversation again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, this clinical enterprise is a top priority for this board and for me, and in particular how it impacts the medical school at the University of Minnesota. We've been working hard on this difficult issue, and we need to ensure the success of the academic mission, and we have a system, and we need to have a system that allows our physicians to do what they do best, provide high-quality care, advanced care, train the next generation of medical leaders. Dean Tolar is here to give us a practical update on the current status of mHealth, understanding that this board will have decisions to make in the May and June time period. So, Dr. Tolar, welcome, and the floor is yours with the agreement of the chair.
Yes, Dean and Dr. Tolar, welcome to the Board of Regents meeting.
It's great to be here. Mr. Chair, Regents, President Kaler, everybody else in the hall. This is a tremendous opportunity, of course, to share with the board and everybody else what we have been doing. And Vice President Levine has made a very good point about the research, and that is one of the pillars of the medical enterprise in the state of Minnesota. And Chancellor Carroll has introduced the educational bandwidth, that is the second pillar of that enterprise. And my task today is to introduce the third, which would be the clinical care. We also should keep in mind that this is an essential task for the state of Minnesota to have the University of Minnesota being on these strong pillars, because we are the provider and employer of choice. We are the entity that provides the workforce for the state of Minnesota. Chances are that 7 out of 10 physicians in the state of Minnesota are trained at the University of Minnesota. So we have a tremendous responsibility in this essence to be able to maneuver in this space so that we do deliver the best possible care in this state, and we do in fact. So now somebody's going to help me with the slides? If not, I can speak without them. So the chance is that you have seen this in action, but rather what is our goal here is no longer a treatment of disease. Our goal now in the 21st century is going to be a restoration of health. The part of doing this is not just academic, not just educational, but it is in fact the ability to be economically viable and economically strong. The way you do this in the academic medicine today is that you partner with a healthcare system that has the economic bandwidth to support the academic medicine. In your packet, because we have no slides, there is you do have it, yeah. So if you, I do. I thought that it's going to be up there as well. There is a ability to.
I'm afraid the board is woefully unable to help you with the technology challenge. There may be other resources in the room, but
Mr. Chair, I am absolutely comfortable speaking without slides. The essence is that you are looking at a relationship that started in 1996 with the University of Minnesota Hospital being ceded to the healthcare system in town called Fairview. At that time, there is a 30-year affiliation agreement signed, and we had decades now of relationship that essentially has generated the margin for the system by the University Hospital without capturing the benefits of that activity, and to put it very bluntly, in a way, not being able to capitalize on the tremendous asset that we have at the University of Minnesota, which is our faculty. These are some of the brightest and most brilliant people I've ever seen, and I myself have been attracted to this gravitational pull of University of Minnesota for that reason. You can be very good and you can do good at the same time. However, the relationship has not progressed as we planned at the initial inception, and what happened was that instead of having this dynamic back and forth and this co-creation of growth in the healthcare system and the flow in the academic medicine, we have been faced with multitude of frictions and multitude of contracts, multitude of delays, and multitude of misunderstandings, that are at the essence of the work within the medical school and the healthcare system. We have attempted in 2013 to integrate some of this functionality by using a what we call mHealth agreement, which has been started in 2013, and it's an integrated structure between the University of Minnesota, the University of Minnesota physicians, and the Fairview system. And this was approved for the 5-year term. At the same time, we have advanced, and adapted to the market stressors and market forces in a way of opening what we call clinical and surgical center, which is a much more nimble, much more efficient way of delivering healthcare today. And also for 5 years, this has been in existence. Now we have seen the deficiencies in this overall system to the point that we and Fairview intended not to review the mHealth system at the 5-year mark. So this agreement will end on the last of May of this year. Now, I said that this is an essential functionality for the state. I said this is existential in a way for the healthcare system that I mentioned, and also at the medical school at the university. It is, thirdly, on your next slide, an empirical exercise in a way. So we have been coming back to the table very diligently and discussing this with the leadership of the Fairview system, and we have maintained the core principles that are summarized on your next slide, which would be trust born of the joint strategic planning, the independence of the University of Minnesota physician practice plan, which is the only way to assure the high quality and the high volume that come through the university hospitals and clinics. The governance, of course, is the reflection of the deep respect for this Board of Regents and the constitutional extension from the state of Minnesota and land-grant university that we have to the functionality of the medical system. Fourth, the organizational structure has to be economically viable. The funds flow has to be reflective of what we do. The service lines refer to the way of practicing medicine slightly differently than the departmental silos of the old. So instead of having a cardiology alone, you would have a service line that operates on the breadth of vascular surgery, cardiology, immunology, if there is a heart transplant involved, and so forth. The education and research, again, very articulately pointed out by Regent Rocha and Regent Omari, this is an ecosystem question. This is how we do medical care better, because we actually educate the next generation of practitioners. The research is, as the Vice President Kramer would say, the way of dismantling the disorder so that we understand it better and then can operate slightly more efficiently next time we see a patient with the same disorder. And of course, we are very insistent and very directional, deliberate in how we phrase the term of the agreement and the brand of the University of Minnesota, which is the part of our legacy and externalization of who we are in the first place. The last part of this summer is going to be entrepreneurial. We are very clear on the assets that we bring to the table, and we seek a partner that can deliver on the symmetry in the partnership. We do agree that there is a complementarity of functions. That's why we insist on the integrity of the UMP being the kernel around which and through which our physicians, our faculty operates. Thirdly, the academic leadership is something that is not a demand, that would come from our campus and be in some way dictatorial or doctrinaire. It is not. It is the essential ingredient of modern 21st century medicine in the United States. We are very clear on being resilient in the market forces and in being actually the unit that benefits from the stresses of the market. And the way we intend to do this is to grow with the assets that we are able to provide to the marketplace. To do that, we need a strong academic support, which is the way that we articulate, some of our priorities with the healthcare system. And of course, we are quite strong on the statements that lead to the mHealth brand and the brand of the University of Minnesota. So looping back to the pillars of the medical care and medical education in the state of Minnesota, this is an essential function for the state. We provide the workforce, we provide the education, we provide the people who take care of your loved ones. The educational part is essential in this, and the research as well, for the reasons that others have described better than I can. And the community is truly benefiting from our vitality and our ability to grow. And lastly, the legacy is very important to me. I think we are in a position of doing social justice, and I see the access to health care as a fundamental human right. And that is why what you do and what the doctors do and any healthcare professionals do is still a noble calling. Thank you all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dean Tolar. That is a very capable and high-level summary of a incredibly complex history and set of challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. And before I ask our colleagues in the room here, I want to check in with our colleagues via phone and see if any of them would like to share observations, feedback, or provide questions to Dean Tolar.
Chair McMillan?
Yes, Regent Cohen.
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to thank Dean Tolar for all the hard work that he's putting in as we come and approach the May 31st deadline about what we're going to do. And I particularly appreciated some of the core principles that you enumerated: the trust, the independence of the UMP practice plan, and some of the other elements. So I just want to say thank you for the hard work, and I'm hoping and optimistic that we can come to an agreement because, as you said, being alive with the healthcare system in this day and age is pretty crucial. Thanks.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. Regents Johnson or Svigum? All right, hearing none from the road, Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Tolar, for your work and presentation today. We are at a really pivotal time with Fairview right now. That's obvious, and I'm pleased to see the sense of urgency that you're bringing to this situation, because it does need to get dealt with, and for everyone's sake. There are some great opportunities out there that you alluded to on growth and cost savings and branding, and so keep up the good work on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Regent Lucas.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I would thank you for your report. I don't think it's very often that we get such a clear, succinct, unvarnished view of the challenges ahead, and I'm very grateful for that, because it really underlines the challenge we have against us and the deadlines that we face, and so thank you for that.
Any response? You don't need to make one, but you're welcome to.
Regents Cohen, Beeson, Lucas, thank you very much. Nothing would happen without you. Nothing would happen without the team. I am, in fact, humbled by the opportunity that you have given me to be able to serve the university in this capacity. I am energized by the opportunity as well, because I see, what others may perceive as a crisis as an opportunity to actually do some good. I would be absolutely nowhere if I didn't have the team on our side, with the General Counsel, Doug Peterson, with the Vice Presidents, Brian Burnett and Matt Kramer, you and the faculty and the chairs that are behind getting these things done. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your support.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't sure I'd make any comments today. I know we've had an opportunity to exchange some thoughts, and we as a board have also as well. But I guess for the somewhat public consumption, I want to first pull the reins a little bit on the congratulatory comments, because we still have got a lot of work to do, as you know, and just add a droplet or two of constructive skepticism. I want to make sure that we understand that one of the really dramatic hurdles in reaching an agreement that will work long term for the university and not put a future board in the same situation that we find ourselves, that we really have, there's some DNA questions here, and I'm very happy to see that you've identified some opportunities to address those things. The academic leadership being so critical, because obviously when you're partnering with an enterprise that has kind of a different core as a community-based system, there's a natural tension in us, bringing the center of gravity into that academic medicine model. So I want to just on the record just make the statement that I'm going to be looking very closely at that part of it to ensure that we're really truly seeing a melding of mission, to know that this relationship is something that can be successful, and appreciate that you understand the resolve of this board to ensure that we make those progress in that area, and I also appreciate the fact that you've brought an energy and a ingenuity to this process that I think is really essential, and I'm looking forward to you continuing to move us in a positive direction as we have options in front of us. Thank you.
Dr. Chair, Regent Rocha, thank you very much for the balanced view, because I am, of course, seeking your criticism, and I'm delighted that you see some parts of what we do as laudable, but I'm very realistic in this. I think, and I like your metaphor of DNA. I have PhD in molecular biology, and I work with DNA. So this is a good metaphor, because it is, as in human body, the genome, and everything that comes after the cells or tissues, are abstractions of that DNA blueprint. And the same way I operate, through the complex system of the healthcare relationships. So thank you for that, Mr. Chair.
Well, Regent Rocha is bolder than me, because I have a saying I like to use that somebody is or is not genetically hardwired to do something, but with you I'm afraid to use that. So.
I'm easy.
All right, Regent Hsu, and then I think we're going to be close to wrapping up. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dean Tolar, for stepping up and taking on this task. I know you are still doing research and still have interests in that area, but this area is very important for us, as you know. So I'd like to thank you for not only stepping up, but for your hard work and trying to get up to speed very quickly, because the deadline was set a long time ago, a year ago, or actually it was set when we negotiated the agreement originally. But I would like to see an agreement. I'm optimistic that you'll be able to bring something to us at some point before the deadline. And I want to reiterate what I said the first time we did this a couple years ago. And at the time I said failure is not an option. And I want to repeat that. I think we have to be able to see some type of agreement by May 31st, or hopefully sooner. And I know that's not very much time, but I know you're working hard at it. I do think that our DNA is probably 97% in sync with Fairview. Maybe that's wrong, but within a few percent, and I think we're better together than we are apart, and I'll just leave it there, and thank you for all that you've done.
Dean Tolar, the last word, and then we're going to move on.
I am, Mr. Chair, Regents, Mr. President, everybody, I'm deeply grateful, for your support, in all these complicated matters. Thank you.
Thank you for finding your way down here today and your ongoing hard work. You have a very full plate. All right. That brings us to the point in our meeting where we traditionally or typically hear from committee reports and adopt committee business. Only one committee met this month, which is usual for March. We don't have meetings, and I'm going to call on Regent Beeson, who chaired a meeting of the Lit Review Committee, to report.
Chair McMillan, the Litigation Review Committee met earlier this morning. At this meeting, we adopted a resolution that authorized the closing of the meeting to discuss matters subject to attorney-client privilege. That concludes my report.
Thank you. There were no other committees that met, which brings us to old business, which I believe there is none, but there may be. No old business. Is there any new business to come before the board? No new business. I would then happily entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. We stand adjourned. Thank you on the phone, Regents Swigum, Cohen, and Johnson. We are adjourned.
Okay.
Thanks, Rob.